Thank you to those witnesses who've been patient, and we might kick off. Thanks again. Good to see Mr. Clark. I just wanted to go over a couple of issues that we may have already covered, but I just wanted to tease them out in a little more detail. Mr. Clark, at Esmus, you advised that the selection of board members for NBN Co following the election followed the usual process of long lists, short lists and a recommendation to the Minister. That was your evidence?
It was, Senator. With the qualification around Dr Switkowski, I think there was a point of difference around that they were on different tracks. The general point of my evidence stands, but as you recall, the timings of the appointments of Dr Switkowski and then the subsequent appointments were separate. So I don't want to infer that it was all bundled up into one single process.
No, was this Egon Zender?
No, it wasn't.
Who was doing this process? Was it
Russell? No, Russell Reynolds.
Russell Redlands.
Reynolds.
Russell.
It's a EZ type firm, another of those firms that do provide those kinds of services.
Okay. And who engaged them? NBN Co, the department? Mr. Turnbull?
The department.
Oh, you engaged them?
Yes.
Okay. And is it a coincidence that all the people that Mr. Turnbull had approached prior to the election were all on the list?
Well, first of all, Senator, I'm not aware of who Mr. Turnbull. I don't have full knowledge of who Mr. Turnbull may have spoken with prior to the election, so I'm unable to comment on that.
Well, it was in quite a bit of media publicity. It started back, and I think I had a discussion with Mr. Switkowski, but also Mr. Milne's name was out there many months before the election.
Indeed, I acknowledge the point that the names were amongst not the totality, but were amongst those on which there was speculation.
Who compiled the original list?
I'm simply observing that I have no direct knowledge as to the totality of conversations that were held.
If you suggested otherwise, that would be impossible. It's another totality of the Minister's mind. It's so awesome. So the short lists or the long lists were provided to the department, given you employed them, and then the short lists were provided.
So again, I need to separate the process for Chair, Dr Switkowski, and for the...
There wasn't really a process. We're not pretending there was a process. Mr. Turnbull wanted Mr. Switkowski. Well,
there was a process in that he was not appointed until the government appointed him.
Oh, sorry, it went through Cabinet. Yes, no, I accept that. But Mr. Russell Reynolds' company...
Sorry, Russell Reynolds is the name of the firm, not an
Russell
individual.
Reynolds didn't do a chair search, did they?
There was discussion about chair options.
That's a no then.
They didn't do a full chair search?
No.
No, they did not.
They didn't engage in any process.
No, but
a discussion is not a search process, Mr. Clark.
No, Senator, it's... may I expand? Thank you. If the inference of your suggestion was that no other names were considered or canvassed or possible chair appointments, then that's not the case. That's the only point that I'm making. It was open at all stages through there, and there were discussions, and the chairman was not appointed until he was appointed, and other options were available to the government.
But Mr. Turnbull's favourite had been known for a long time. Okay.
So in the second part of...
Back to the second strand?
Yes, indeed.
Whereby a long list and a short list were...
Yes. And that indeed was the process where Reynolds were engaged to do a search and prepare a long list, which they did. The chairman was consulted in that process before advice to the shareholding ministers, and that list was weaned down through the sorts of processes.
So how many names were on the long list provided to you by Russell Reynolds? Or did they only come with a short list?
Yeah, order of magnitude 30 plus on the initial pass, Senator.
And how many made the short list?
Order of magnitude 10.
And was Mr Milne on the shortlist?
All of the appointments that were eventually announced by the government were on the shortlist.
So just to be clear, that's Mr Milne, Mr Hackett,
Yes. And Mr Flanagan.
oh, Mr Flanagan, yep. Okay. Now, was Dr Switkowski's name put forward by yourself, by the Minister, or by the Russell Reynolds people?
Well, I think you're going into... when you say put forward, could you elaborate?
To be on the list.
Sorry, there was...
Sorry, there was no list. Sorry, I forget that.
There was a process by which the shareholding ministers made...
Well, who put Mr Switkowski's name in the ring?
Well, I believe that was the Minister, Senator.
There's no shock. I mean, he was publicly touting him around the country for 6 months before the election, so I'd have been shocked if you said anything else, Mr Clark, given the public support that he was gaining.
But I feel the need to emphasise my earlier evidence that at no point was he the only candidate until the decision was made.
So while Dr Switkowski was CEO of Telstra, did it build any significant new network assets? Was a 3G network built while he was there?
I don't have that detail, Senator. I'm sorry.
The answer is no. Mr Trujillo built the 3G network. But if you could take on notice and see for us whether or not there was any significant new network assets created under Dr Switkowski's stewardship of Telstra.
Certainly, Senator.
And Dr Switkowski was CEO of Optus for 14 months, is that correct?
Again, I don't have the precise detail, but that...
Was there a reason his tenure was so short, only 14 months?
Again, Senator, I don't have that detail.
Senator Conroy, I believe Mr Switkowski's going to be here next week. Maybe you could ask him yourself.
I look forward to it.
Instead of Mr Clark, who obviously doesn't have that information.
We're talking about a formalised process and how people get names on the list with their employment records. Dr Switkowski was unable to tell us what Mr Adcock was doing before being hired. He didn't know what his job description was. He couldn't tell us what Mr Rousselot's job description was other than yachting with Mr Turnbull. Not that he'd ever been yachting with Mr Turnbull himself. Dr Switkowski was very kind enough to tell us that.
I think we probably need to be a little careful about drawing parallels between people that we know from previous lives.
Oh, look, Dr Switkowski is well known to many, many people, including, I'm sure, Senator Smith.
Indeed. A very capable person.
Confidence.
Perhaps more so than
When was
Mr.
the first
Calder.
time that Mr Milne was approached to be on the board of NBN Co, and by whom? Apart from Mr Turnbull 6 months earlier.
I can't give you a precise answer to that. I certainly recall him being one of the options in the long listing stage, but I can't give you a
Perhaps
precise
you could take
stage.
that on notice.
I will, thank you, Senator.
Now, before Mr Milne was announced as being a successful board appointee, there were media reports that he was at NBN Co working for NBN Co. Did you see any of those reports? Are you familiar with those reports? Is it true, do you know?
I don't recall seeing that report.
Okay. So I saw them myself, so I was surprised at the time, or not surprised, given the previous publicity that he was getting a job at NBN Co. Now, Mr Flanagan, who placed his name on the list?
Again, Senator, I'm not going to be able to give you precise answers to those
I'm happy for you
issues.
to take that on notice.
Certainly.
Are there any governance issues around someone who's been a direct report to a CEO ending up on a board a short time later?
Well, I would not as a matter of first principles. I wouldn't have said, Senator. I think
Really? You've never read any literature on corporate governance at all?
That wasn't your question, Senator. Is that? Yes, I've read literature on corporate governance.
Okay. Now, just moving off board appointments for the moment. What policy outcomes are designed to be achieved by structural separation?
I'll ask my colleague, Mr Robinson, to respond to that. Thank you, Senator.
Yes, it's Ian Robinson. I'm Deputy Secretary of the Department of Communications. Well, I think, Senator, structural separation and the reasons for it are based on a view that fixed line infrastructure can be a natural monopoly, and to structurally separate facilitates retail competition.
Okay. So things like more competition, cheaper prices. Could you just very briefly outline for the committee how structural separation was to be achieved under the previous government's policy?
Well, Senator, in the definitive agreements that exist between the company and government and Telstra and Optus in relation to the HFC element of Optus essentially provide for the closure of the copper under the previous government, the closure of the copper network and HFC networks, and the migration of those customers to NBN Co, which is a structurally separated entity.
So structural separation is delivered in full at the end of the project. Are there any provisions in Telstra's structural separation undertaking preventing Telstra from favouring its retail operations during the construction period of the NBN?
There are, Senator, yes.
Do you know what they're referred to as?
Just a moment, Senator. Mr Hazlett might be able to help.
Mark Hazlett, First Assistant Secretary, Telecommunications, Department of Communications. Senator, I would take it that what you were referring to are the interim equivalence and transparency rules.
Tell me all about them.
Essentially, they are designed to ensure that Telstra, in continuing to operate the wholesale services over the copper network, operates them in a way that doesn't enable it to favour its retail customers in terms of service and allocation of services and those types of activities. And so essentially to replicate the benefits or the characteristics of functional separation that would have arisen otherwise.
Was the ACCC approval of the structural separation undertaking something that had to be completed before the existing arrangements between Telstra and the NBN Co could be enacted?
It was a condition precedent to the DAs coming into effect.
Okay. What are the options on the table for NBN Co gaining access to Telstra's copper network?
I think, Senator, they're issues that are actually being considered as part of the strategic review, which...
But the department must be contemplating options.
Yes, we
You
certainly...
can't be not.
No, we certainly are, Senator, but as Mr Robinson has indicated, given that this will necessarily go to a commercial negotiation, we do not consider it appropriate to be canvassing those options in a public forum.
Oh, I can understand the outcome. If you were to speculate on where you thought it should go, that would be a serious faux pas.
Yeah.
But just outlining for the committee's benefit, because not everybody's followed the structural separation debate quite as closely, the different options.
Well, my preference would be to take a very conservative position at this early stage of the discussion.
So, for instance, an option is acquiring the copper network. I don't think you've revealed any state secrets by uttering those words, Mr Clark. Procure a managed service from Telstra. I don't think you've jeopardised future negotiations by assisting the committee by outlining that. Or gain access to the copper on regulated terms as an access seeker. Like, there are three options. I don't think the world's just ended. I don't think I've prejudiced the... and there could be others, which I haven't mentioned, which I was hoping you might be able to indicate. But I don't think by me revealing those three potential options I've jeopardised commercial negotiations.
But it's not your responsibility, ultimately, Chair. It's Mr Clark's and others. So whatever
Mr Clark's a big boy. He doesn't need your help.
No.
He's doing fine.
But I think we're going into the realms of hypotheticals again, aren't we?
No, looking at policy options. That's what departments do. They draw up policy options. They haven't put them to the government yet, and I'm not asking them to say what they were putting, but in terms of what are the things that you'd consider, they're just policy options. Nothing more exciting than that.
Senator, my strong preference at this stage, given the nature and scale of the commercial negotiations ahead, is not to be canvassing either the scope or detail of policy options in front of the government, the company or Telstra.
Okay. Well, I note that NBN Co's caretaker advice to the department states a preference for acquiring a managed service from Telstra. In fact, the exact text reads, it is NBN Co's strong preference that the company procures a managed service from Telstra. What are the implications for structural separation if NBN Co was to procure a managed service from Telstra to deliver an FTTN network?
Well, there's several points I need to make in response to that, Senator. First, as I indicated earlier in this session this morning, I have no intention of canvassing the detail of advice provided by the company to the department for the purpose of incoming government briefing. So I'm not going to respond to specifics in the
Let me rephrase
in terms
it.
of the proposition.
In a document that NBN Co supplied to its own board, they state a preference for acquiring a managed service from Telstra. In fact, the exact text reads, it's NBN Co's strong preference that the company procures a managed service from Telstra. What are the implications for structural separation if...
I've got a question, Chair, that if you're the only senator left here, the witness... I'm just about the witnessing and the privilege issue.
I'm happy to, if there's a division and people can't stay, for us to suspend temporarily.
Thanks very much, Chair.
It's different to suddenly getting a phone call you've got to rush out of the room to deny a quorum. the implications for structural separation as canvassed between NBN Co and its board. What would be the policy implications for structural separation if NBN was to procure a managed service?
So, Senator, I'd like to respond to your question in two parts. Firstly, I'm not going to make reference to any particular confidential document, but accepting the generality of your question in terms of a policy scenario. Here there are two key processes that are in front of the government that will help address this question. One is the strategic review itself, and the second is the regulatory review process that I'm expecting will commence soon. So those two reports that will come to government will provide the basis for resolving the policy point that you make. My preference would be not to speculate on policy scenarios at this stage, noting imminent responses.
I'm not trying to draw you on anything that may or may not be announced tomorrow. In the more general, what would be the legislative issues? I know you did sort of refer. So what would need to be changed?
It is clear that changes would need to be made to such a scenario. I don't know that I could give you chapter and verse off the cuff as to what it would be.
I'm sure Mr. Hazlett can.
Quite possibly.
I'm not sure I can give you the exact chapter and verse either, Senator.
Give me the condensed version. The condensed version for dummies, so help me out as usual.
We would have to look at the provisions of the amendments that were made to the CCA Act to encompass or to cover the arrangements in place to authorise the definitive agreements and to set up the structural separation arrangements. So they would have to be examined to determine any necessary amendments to give effect to a changed arrangement. They're the principal areas of change.
Okay. And the implication for Telstra's structural separation undertaking?
I think, Senator, it really does depend on the model.
No, I'm just talking in a managed service. I'm not trying to canvass widely. I'm saying this particular one, which has seen some reaction out there in the broader community, so it's a part of a public debate. I just wanted to understand the implications.
Well, there'd be a range of possible managed service options as well, and I think the strategic review will say more about potentially what model may be adopted, and then after that, I think we'd be better placed to answer your question.
Are you on the list next week? You just offered to be on the list from what I could work out, Mr. Clark. You might want to dock Mr. Robinson's pay for that one. But under the existing legislation, can the Minister make a determination that Telstra can functionally separate?
Now I have to recall the exact... there was provision in the Act for the Minister to determine a requirement for Telstra to functionally separate. There was also provision that in circumstances where a structural separation undertaking was accepted by the ACCC, then the Minister could, by instrument as I recall it, that provision then ceased to become operable, and this structural separation undertaking arrangements prevailed.
What would be the implications for Telstra's structural separation undertaking if the Minister was to make a declaration like that?
Sorry, at which stage, Senator? I'm not quite clear exactly what you mean.
So what I'm asking is, the Minister does have the power to make a functional separation, and what would be the implications for Telstra's SSU if the Minister was to make a functional separation?
I would have to take on notice the precise arrangements. My understanding is that essentially with the acceptance and coming into effect of the structural separation undertaking, those arrangements have effectively lapsed.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yes.
So if the minister was to go down that path, it wipes the SSU out, basically. I'm using slightly colourful language, but
I would prefer not to
agreeing
provide...
with I'm agreeing with how you described it before.
Yeah,
So-
I'm not in a position to give legal advice, Senator.
Now, I note from Mr Clark's estimates testimony that there are, to paraphrase broadly, 4 reviews to be undertaken.
Yes.
First, the strategic review. Second, the broadband quality project. And how many officers from the broadband quality project are here today?
The team leader is present today as
Excellent.
requested, Senator.
Good, thank you. Third, the cost-benefit analysis, and then the regulatory review process.
The cost-benefit...
And fourth, a policy audit.
Correct. The cost-benefit and regulatory
Yeah,
review is
together,
a single
sorry.
process. Yep.
Right. So just to confirm this testimony, the legislative regulatory framework that would apply under an FTTN scenario will be examined as part of the third of these reviews.
The cost-benefit and regulatory review would deal with the sorts of questions you're asking of Mr Hazlitt as to what would be the regulatory environment associated with any particular model, construction model.
Okay. And the department will provide input into this review?
The department will provide the secretariat to it. It will be conducted by experts. But
Henry Urgas.
The announcement, who the members, the experts doing it have not yet been announced, Senator.
You're aware of the judge's statements in that infamous case that Mr Urgas appeared?
The
I can read them out again. I've put them on the record on a number of occasions. You can't be unaware of them.
It's your prerogative to read them again, Senator.
Will the review examine any effects from changes to structural separation arrangements? Now, things like detriments to consumer benefits, for example, existing structural separation arrangements, if they're watered down?
At the highest level, it's obviously the review hasn't yet commenced, and nor has the folk to conduct the review with department support been announced.
I thought Mr Turnbull had a press release ready to go and put out.
The government has not announced the composition of the cost-benefit and regulatory review, Senator.
Even the Cabinet won't swallow Mr Urgas. Is that the problem? Sorry, you don't have to answer that, Mr Clark.
No, I hope
Keep
not.
going.
I see the sequencing of this, the strategic review tomorrow, cost-benefit and regulatory review, which would look at legislative regulatory arrangements, market structures, if you will, and these 2 sources of advice to government, the advice that the company is presenting, the advice of the regulatory experts, would then enable final policy decisions to be made about the market design and operating model to complete the rollout.
Okay. Will the review examine the social benefits foregone, particularly in business productivity and improvements to government service delivery, if NBN Co cannot offer the full suite of enhanced services under an FTTN model?
Well, the sorts of... I mean...
That'd be a factor, surely.
The question goes to the general point. I interpret your question in terms of costs and benefits, and certainly a consideration of the costs and benefits under build-out scenarios is clearly part of the scope of that review.
So, foregone social benefits
Look, I can't...
would have to be included if it's a legit. I mean, I know Mr Urgas has already done a cost-benefit analysis in, I think he said, 48 hours. So we'll just dust that one off and then charge a lot of money for it. But that would surely, it would make sense for that to be included.
Look, Senator, at this stage, prior to the commencement of that review, I can't make a commitment to a specific line of detail. The generality of your question about examining the costs and benefits is certainly the part of the project.
Will the review examine potential resource benefits under the various scenarios? For example, the effects on the allocation of broadcasting spectrum if a full FTTP build can carry high-definition television services and an FTTN network that can't? But that's the capacity for TV to move online and free up an enormous amount of spectrum. That'd be a pretty big benefit to the broader Australian economy, I would have thought.
Again, a very specific question in the spirit that it's part of a broader examination of costs and benefits. It's certainly
Ms Mason, you're very fond of spectrum. I know you value it highly. I've felt the lash of your tongue about how valuable it is. That would be a very significant benefit if free-to-air networks ultimately migrated onto an FTTP network and freed up all that spectrum for...
Senator, Finance, through our budget area, has previously looked at the value of spectrum, and spectrum clearly does have an economic value.
Thanks. I was going to ask about the status, but you've indicated the Minister hasn't finalised the panel, notwithstanding the press release that was floating around?
The government has not yet made an announcement on the composition of the panel.
Okay. Any idea when it will be completed? Any indications?
Soon.
Soon? One of my favourite words. So the full legislative and regulatory framework that would apply under an FTTN scenario will not be known before the review is completed. That's correct, right?
Correct.
So
well, it won't be.
We don't know the state of the copper. We've not tested a node on Australian copper, and we have no idea what the regulatory framework will be. But we've got a strategic review which will tell us to go down the path of fibre to the node tomorrow. Well,
okay, Senator, you're making several assumptions that I think I need to correct. First, what precisely is the nature of the advice in the strategic review will soon be available?
I think the evidence earlier, and you were here for it, was that they haven't tested any...
No, that wasn't the point that I was responding to. The point that I was responding to is the nature of the advice in the strategic review is the composition for building out, completing the build out of the NBN will be known when the review is published. The point that it is the government that will make the policy decisions in terms of the market design and the statement of expectations that drives the corporate plan.
Well, I thought, sorry to correct you, and you may not have been watching, thank God, for you. Dr. Switkowski made it very clear that there will be FTTN as part of the review. He didn't try and hide it. He just said there will be a greater amount, and by definition, given that it's zero at the moment, there will be a greater amount of FTTN than is currently the case.
I accept, and I wasn't meaning to imply otherwise.
So I'm just going on public commentary that Dr. Switkowski has made and the earlier evidence today. So we've got no testing of FTTN in Australian copper done by NBN Co. We've got no regulatory certainty at all around the new framework, and we don't have any advice about the legislative framework either at this stage before they make their decisions tomorrow, or they hand their final, or they're making the decisions tomorrow and they're handing it to the government. Has the department prepared advice?
Senator, sorry, may I? Excuse me, may I respond to that?
That was probably more of a rhetorical question, but feel free to add to the committee's knowledge.
Thank you, Chair. I'm responding to the use of the word decision, and
I wasn't trying to be pejorative about the word decision. I'm happy for it to be recommendation if that's easier for you.
I think it is an important point to note that the report, the strategic review, is advice to the government, and it's the government that will be the decision maker.
Okay. Has the department prepared advice and/or a list of names for the minister to consider in conducting the review?
Sorry, which of the reviews are we...
So this is the cost-benefit regulatory review?
Yes, Senator, we did.
Okay. And was Henry Ergas on the list that you prepared?
Well, I think that's a discussion we should have after the list is announced. Given that the government has not announced the list, I don't think it's my prerogative to canvass names.
Is he on the list?
It's not my prerogative to canvass names prior to a decision and an announcement.
You can answer a factual question of whether or not you put him on the list.
Well, you can ask me any number of potential names, and I'm observing the protocol that until the government's made an announcement, I think it's appropriate for me to retain the confidentiality of the names that may or may not have been on at any particular stage.
So, because I think you invited me to, I will. This is Justice Goldberg. His judgment I just want to make sure that it's firmly in your mind before you start preparing lists. And this is his judgment in Qantas Airways, AComp T9, 12 October 2004. It's the Australian Competition Tribunal. And the President, Justice Goldberg, had the following to say. With regard to the latter, we note that on many occasions in the present proceeding, two experts, in particular being Mr Ergas, called on behalf of the applicants, and Professor Timothy Hazeldine, a Professor of Economics at the University of Auckland, called on behalf of the Gullivers Group, appeared reluctant to respond to questions whose answers might have been adverse to the case put by the party calling them. Instead, they provided non-responsive answers and deviated to discussions of other issues which supported the case of the applicants and the Gullivers Group respectively. On some occasions, the presiding member asked the experts whether they could answer the question put to them and asked them not to give a long explanation, but to no avail. Such an attitude and conduct of an expert witness leads to a conclusion of partiality and an inability to express an objective expert opinion upon which reliance can be placed. That's about as damning as it gets from a judge, wouldn't you say, about the ability of somebody to be objective and impartial?
Now, it's purely speculative.
Sorry, that's a judgment by a justice.
Mr Clark hasn't been able to quite properly confirm or not whether or not Mr Ergas and others are on the list.
Making sure
very,
that Mr Clark...
Very unfortunate contribution, Chair. Very unfortunate.
Well, I'll pass your comments on to Justice Goldberg if he's still around to be aware that you think that his comments were inappropriate.
This is not the place.
Did the advice consider... I'll just rephrase this. Are you aware that Mr Ergas was hired by Mr Turnbull to prepare a tax policy when he was Leader of the Opposition?
I'm not aware of that, Senator.
Okay. Are you aware that the tax policy was never released by Mr Turnbull because, according to coalition sources, it was a complete dog and was too embarrassing to be put out in public?
Well, given my previous answer, I'll take that as rhetorical,
Okay.
Senator.
You're aware that Mr Ergas has in the past indicated that a cost-benefit analysis, and he included this in his comment to the former Senate Select Committee, that a cost-benefit analysis could be completed in 3 days.
Excuse me, Chair. Your comments would have much more force if you made them outside the Parliament. Now, your point of view would be much more relevant
do you have
if
a
you
question?
made it outside of the Parliament.
Okay, thank you. So are you aware that Mr Ergas made that claim on Hansard to the Senate Select Committee?
I have an awareness of commentary by various players in this area. I'm not going to go into a...
He has written extensively, to be fair, almost weekly in The Australian, where he's put forth his views extensively on the NBN. That's a factual...
I acknowledge that he is published in this area, yes. He's a well-known regulatory economist with experience in this area.
And he's extensively supported the value of the vertical integration of Telstra. That's the main body of his work over many years. Are you familiar with that body of work, Ms Mason? Are you familiar with Mr Ergas's body of work on how important it is to have not to have structural separation of Telstra? You must have seen it.
Not in detail, Senator.
Not in detail. That is such a worthwhile answer. And did anyone notice that during the last federal election, Mr Ergas was handing out how-to-vote cards for UZ?
He's got excellent political judgment
in the last
as well as a
election.
contribution to make the telecommunications debate.
No,
Sounds like exactly the right... I hope that Mr Ergas is on the list. I hope that Mr Ergas is on the list because he sounds like he's got great commercial and political judgment.
Political judgment. Excellent. Justice Goldberg didn't find him quite so good on...
If it was going to be a discussion or an inquiry about Mr Ergas, I would have come better prepared to at least balance the point of view, Chair.
Of Mr Ergas. Well, it's easy. Just get Malcolm Turnbull to release that old tax policy of Henry's. Or you could point out that he was structurally separated from his own company when it went into liquidation.
So soon after the 7th of September, I wouldn't be talking about failed policies, Chair.
Now, just moving on, I'll take the advice of my Senate. I'll take the advice of my fellow senators. I'll move on.
Thank you.
What is the normal practice for NBN Co communications to shareholder departments? You may have heard we had a discussion earlier today about this. When it comes to documents that have to be considered by government, do these documents appear on a portal?
Yes, there is a secure portal arrangement to facilitate transfer of confidential documents.
Is it the case that drafts of these documents are often provided to shareholder departments prior to board consideration to enable shareholder departments to prepare timely advice for government?
I can...
Yeah, we both know the answer, but you need to say it on the record.
Yeah, board documents less common, but documents that are conveyed between the parties, yes, it is that is a common practice.
So was the draft version 13 of NBN Co's 2013 to 16 corporate plan submitted to shareholder departments via the portal prior to its consideration by the NBN Co board on the 19th of September? It's a simple factual question. You know it's already been asked. It should be very easy to ascertain.
Yeah, and I'm not going to answer it, Senator.
What?
And
sorry,
Senator,
you're not going to answer a factual question about the transmission of information, not about the content of the information, about the transmission of the information.
No, your question related to a specific document,
yes,
not to the generality of how information is
I'm
transferred.
now asking you very clearly whether you can confirm that version 13 was made available on the portal prior to its consideration by the NBN Co board. I haven't asked you what's in it. No. I haven't asked you anything about the content. I've simply asked you a factual question, which I cannot imagine what defence you have for not answering a factual question about a transmission issue. It's a process issue. It's not even a content issue.
No, Senator, with respect, I think it does go to the nature of the communications between the company and the government of the day and the status of certain documents and transactions, and I believe it's inappropriate.
So this is not... You can say no, I can't ask you about advice to government. This is NBN Co's interaction with the department.
In relation to a document intended for government, and I'm choosing... Senator, may I? I'm choosing to uphold the principle that the communications that are intended between the agency through the department to the government, the nature of them, what was on the table when, which is implicit in your question.
I'm asking you a date when you saw version 13 of the corporate plan, 2013, 2016, version 13. When were you made aware of it?
Oh,
not its content, not by the government. This is by NBN Co. It is not a state secret. There is no reason for you not to answer this question, Mr Clark. None whatsoever. Ms Mason, do you take the same view that you don't have to answer questions of process?
Senator, it's difficult to give a blanket answer to that. I think officials are as helpful to committees in the Parliament as we possibly can be, while still...
So you're joining the cover-up engaged in by NBN Co officials about the existence of a draft corporate plan version 13. You're joining the cover-up. It didn't exist.
Senator, I'm saying the disposition that officials take in relation to questions from parliamentary committees depends on the detail of a particular question.
And the context, no doubt, as well.
So you are joining the cover-up. So this document doesn't exist. Is that what you're trying to pretend?
Senator, at the estimates, I acknowledged formally the difficult position, the fact that a leaked document being on the public record,
as you say... That was version 12. I'm talking about version 13, which hasn't been leaked.
Well, I'm simply saying that I'm observing the principle that communications that were confidential, timing, context, who saw what, when...
Content, I totally accept your position.
He indicated that he's not feeling comfortable about asking the question and
I'm challenging his rationale. Well, he's doing fine. He's a grown-up. He doesn't need your help.
It would be actually really good to be able to get onto some other things apart from badgering the witness about something he's already indicated he doesn't intend to answer.
I just want to make it absolutely clear that Mr Clark is joining the cover-up about the lack of existence of a document he knows exists and was up on his portal, and he's refusing to confirm that fact.
Senator, I'm rejecting the characterisation of my evidence as a cover-up.
It's exactly what it is, Mr Clark.
I reject that,
Senator.
It's exactly what it is. What advice for government was prepared by shareholder departments in relation to version 13 of the corporate plan?
My earlier answer about the confidential nature of that is stands.
You're drawing a completely false line between a process question and the content, Mr. Clyde.
I'm happy
and you're
to
doing
please.
it absolutely deliberately and showing contempt for the Senate. Absolutely deliberately. This is a process question, not a content question.
If perhaps I misunderstood. I'm happy to consider again my response if you'd care to rephrase the question, Senator.
Well, maybe, Mr Clark, you might take it on notice and seek some advice and provide the Senator with an answer if it appears that the answer that he's seeking is something that you're comfortable to give. I mean, I think forcing you to do so today in a public hearing is a completely unreasonable request by the Senator.
Well, I appreciate you're going to want to cover it up, but
No, I don't
I'm
want
just
to cover
shocked that
anything up.
department officials want to engage in the cover-up.
They don't believe that they're covering
On
up.
what
He's
day-
answering your questions,
On what
Senator.
day did Mr Turnbull ask the NBN board to resign?
Firstly, Senator, the characterisation of your question is not, I believe, true.
I'm just going off an AFR article, that's all.
Well, dare I say the truism that you can't believe everything you read in the press, Senator?
Or the evidence given to you at Senate estimates recently.
No.
But keep going.
So the characterisation is not correct. And as to the day in which there was communication between the then Minister...
They all did resign on the 19th or the 20th, didn't they?
I don't have the dates in front of me, but there were a number of resignations.
So what happened that they, by osmosis, they heard on the grapevine that their resignations were desired?
No, there's a distinction between being asked to offer your resignation and being asked to resign.
I'll accept that. So when were they asked to offer their resignation, if that makes it easier for you?
Thank you, Senator, it does. And I don't have the date in front of me, but I'd be very happy to take that on notice.
Was it on the day of the board meeting or was it in the lead up to the board meeting?
Oh, again,
That one should be relatively easy to know. I can appreciate you don't have the exact date.
Yeah.
But you should easily be able to remember if it was on the day or it was prior.
I'd still prefer... it's an
I'm happy
important question and...
You want to get it completely accurate? That's
I'd
fine.
like to be double sure and take it on notice. Thank you.
So Mr Turnbull asked for the resignations. That's, most people would use that as he sacked the board.
Ask them to offer.
Asked them to offer. Most people wouldn't quite draw your fine line and say Mr Turnbull sacked the board on the day that they were to consider version 13 of the corporate plan, according to the board papers.
Again, I'm...
You get the board papers, don't you?
No, not as a matter of course.
Okay.
I neither see board papers nor board minutes as a matter of course.
That's right, they get FOI'd and released.
Senator, can I just ask how long you're planning on allowing us to speak to the...
I've got a few more questions.
You've already had an hour and there's only 45 minutes left.
Yeah, well, you guys were out of the room when we were going, so I don't know if that counts,
Well,
but I appreciate it. Now, I wanted to ask, so I just want to make the point. Mr Turnbull sacked the board on the day the board were to consider endorsing version 13 of the corporate plan.
Senator, I'm not able to
That's okay, I understand. Now, during estimates, Minister Fifield stated in relation to the previous version of the corporate plan, and here's where you've got a problem with your previous defence. Senator Fifield read at the table of estimates. I wasn't here. I think you might have been.
I was, Senator.
I've just been provided with some advice in relation to the draft 13 to 2016 corporate plan. Let's call that version 12. I'm advised that there has no status, that it was not accepted by the previous government, which I think is correct, that the Department of Finance thought that the projections were unrealistic and that the new government has declined to consider the 2013 to 2016 draft corporate plan. That was read out by Minister Fifield at Communications Estimates, Ms Mason. Given that statement, can you clarify the reference to the Department of Finance, Ms Mason?
I'm afraid I can't, Senator. I actually have not previously known about that evidence, so I'll need to...
Who would it have, joking aside, who would it have come from if it wasn't you?
Sorry, you said this was Senator Fifield?
This is Senator Fifield read this out. No, but he read this out and he said, I have just been provided with, someone apparently handed him a piece of paper,
Right.
and he said, I've just been provided with some advice in relation to the draft 2013 to 2016 corporate plan. I'm advised that that has no status, that it was not accepted by the previous government, and that the Department of Finance thought that the projections were unrealistic and that the new government has declined to consider the 13 to 16 draft corporate plan. So he states that the Department of Finance thought the projections in version 12 and possibly version 13, but certainly version 12, were unrealistic. So I'm asking you now to explain to me what you thought were the unrealistic, and I'm afraid that it's Senator Fifield, the acting minister at the table, who has opened this door for you. What were the unrealistic?
Senator, I can't answer that. I would need to check. I'm not aware until you've raised it now of
Aren't
that
these comments of Senator
evidence.
Fifield, Ms Mason?
No, but he's speaking on behalf of the Department of Finance.
But
And now I'm
Senator-
asking the Department of Finance to clarify them.
Well, Senator Fifield's in your chamber. Maybe you should ask him that question.
No, he's chosen to read out something speaking on behalf of the Department of Finance. We now have the Department of Finance in front of us, and I'm asking you, the Department of Finance, quite reasonably, what did he mean, and what were the unrealistic projections that they were concerned about?
And Senator, I'm unable to answer because until you read that evidence from the communications estimates hearing, I was not aware of it. So I'm afraid I can't comment.
Okay.
Ms Mason,
where else?
would
Sorry, if I could
Department
finish my line of
Finance
questions.
officials have been at the communications estimates?
No,
No,
No.
we would have
probably been in your
read
own.
out, yes, normally.
So, who would, if someone was seeking the view of the Department of Finance about a corporate plan, who else would they go to but you, Ms Mason? And I'm only laughing because I know your deep, abiding interest and policy following of this topic.
Senator, you're correct in saying that within the Department of Finance...
Other than Mr Tune, it's you.
Yes, the people whose advice might be sought in relation to NBN Co issues would include, of course, the Secretary, myself as Deputy Secretary of Business Procurement and Asset Management, the relevant First Assistant Secretary or the relevant Assistant Secretary or their staff. So there's a number of people who may, from time to time...
But for advice to be given to a minister at a table... that's pretty serious sort of advice. That's not just, hey, the clerk level 3's decided to send a note round to Mitch. Sort of advice to ministers usually passes up a chain. And if Mr Tune did it independently of you, I could, Mr Tune's the secretary. But anybody else in the department who was going to provide advice on the NBN to the minister surely would get your tick off.
I would generally be aware of that.
Like, it would be a breakdown in process if you weren't.
So, and you're correct, Senator, in saying that advice to ministers would normally be signed off at a relatively senior level.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you're not aware of any such advice
Not
at this
with-
point. You may be able to
not
find
with
some,
that.
and
No.
you haven't consulted Mr Tune yet.
No.
But if you could take on notice, what was the basis of the claim that the Department of Finance thought that the projections were unrealistic?
Senator,
whether
where does
that-
this document come from?
So this is the Hansard. Senator Fifield probably gave, you would have been there, I suspect.
I was.
So I'm just reading it, no one's doubting it, and I think Mr Clark's agreeing that it was said.
Okay.
I have a copy here, it's page 63 on Tuesday the 19th of November.
So how would you describe the document? I'm just trying to understand what is it. What's the
Hansard.
No,
the
the document
document
that
which Hansard refers.
which Hansard refers. Just trying to understand, what is the document? Is it a public document? Is it a leaked document? Is it a cabinet document that's been authorised?
I don't know. I'm simply asking the Department of Finance to confirm that they provided advice to the government, that the government then read out publicly, and governments don't mislead the Australian public and Senate committees, what the basis of that advice was. So I'm happy to accept that it's version 12. If it's version 13, then you've both got a real problem with your earlier evidence. But if it's 12, it's out there, it's up on a website, anyone can see it. But what I'm really asking is, was advice offered by the department that made this claim that Mr Senator Fifield made?
So you're asking the department officials to make a comment on a...
No, I've asked them, could they advise us what the unrealistic projections were referred to by Senator Fifield?
That's
Entirely by Senator Fifield.
And
Nothing else.
so the unrealistic expectations or projections, where were they? What were they in?
Senator Fifield was referring to the draft 2013 to 16 corporate plan. And he's clearly then gone away and allegedly got the Department of Finance to give him some advice about the document you want to pretend doesn't exist.
So is this a... What's the status of the document?
Well, I think the government, he went on to indicate, and that the new government has declined to consider the 2013 to 2016 draft corporate plan. But he still went and got advice from the department, according to his own testimony on it. So that's why I say, when you're all trying to sit here and pretend you can't comment on it, well, unfortunately, Senator Fifield went and got commentary on it and opened it up, which is why they've got a problem now. Not me. So anyway, I'll move on. I'll flog this one.
Of course.
I'll move on. I'm happy
yes,
to.
Your time, I think, might be running out,
Ms
Chair,
Mason
because
is going
we
to
have some
take on
questions.
notice and come back to us.
I will look into it, Senator. I'll certainly do that, but it would just seem unusual that we would be providing advice to anybody other than our portfolio minister. And I'd also make the comment that we don't generally disclose the content of advice.
I'm not asking you to disclose content of advice. I'm asking you if you can support the statement by Senator Fifield that the Department of Finance thought that the projections were unrealistic. He's said this is your advice. So you're not revealing advice. He has revealed, allegedly, your advice. I'm now just asking whether or not it's correct you gave the advice. Now you might say, well, taking the Mr Clark defence, that I know nothing. But unfortunately, someone has spoken on your behalf, and I'm just asking you to support it. So I appreciate you can't give me any further information. But we're not answering because it goes to advice to government. Unfortunately, it's blown because the government has revealed the advice. So,
Ms Mason,
anyway.
Speaking more broadly, are you aware or were there concerns about the projections? Not speaking specifically...
This is the advice you didn't want anyone to be allowed to ask a question about. Now you're asking questions about it again. I don't mind, but once you ask, once you get your first ask from Mr Clark... I've got
lots of questions I would like to ask, Chair.
Once you get your first ask from Mr Clark on this, Mr Clark cannot
I think you might be coming
defence.
close to abusing your role as the Chair, because this has been going on since 3:15. Government senators do have some questions.
We didn't actually start till nearly 5:30, just so
government senators do have some questions. Well, we're almost going to... It's almost 4:30. Government senators do have some questions, and in the spirit of fairness and the proper conduct of the
I'm happy
inquiry...
to pause and pass over.
Great. Okay. Great. Okay. I'll start if my other colleagues don't have any other.
You've demanded the call. I'm hoping someone's going to start.
Sorry. Yes. I'm happy to start. I'm just keen to sort of get an understanding around the issue of statement of expectations and how they work and how they're communicated and what they contain.
Yes, Senator. I think the legislation underpinning the NBN provides for the government to issue a statement of expectations as to what is sought from the company. There was a statement of expectations issued by the previous government, and on the 24th of September, the government issued a new statement of expectations, or an interim statement of expectations. There's a copy of that on our website. Mm-hmm. Amongst other things, it gives the broad policy overview for the company going forward. It provides some general guidance and goals for the transition period as the company moves to a new policy environment. It indicated what the company should continue with in this transition period, including deploying the fixed wireless network, offering services over the interim satellite, work associated with the build and launch of the long-term satellites, construction of a transit network and points of interconnect, the development of special services, etc., and the deployment of fibre to new developments. It indicated...
And what was the reasoning behind those elements or aspects being regarded as suitable for continuation?
I think, Senator, the government was wanting to give early guidance to the company so that there was surety about what they should proceed with. And it also gave guidance as to how the rollout for brownfield areas should proceed. The initial letter indicated that they should commence preparation of the 2014-17 corporate plan, and it noted that the outcomes of the strategic review would be important input to that. They asked that the company take some initiatives on transparency, including producing weekly reports as to rollout numbers, and it asked that
they hadn't been done previously?
No, Senator.
Were they with an element of previous statements of expectation?
No, Senator.
Right. So the inclusion of these transparency elements were new to the 24th of September statement of expectation.
Yes, that's correct. And the company has been publishing weekly reports more recently. And it asked that the NBN Co assist with the department's work on the broadband quality and availability work. So that was the initial statement of expectations. I might say the letter also indicated that following the strategic review and the corporate plan, etc., there'll likely be changes of that as the policy goes forward.
And is that and those changes, are they communicated by way of additions or amendments to that statement of expectation, or is it a new statement of expectation that gets?
This one's described as an interim one,
yes.
but there will be either updates or a completely. I'd expect that there will either be updates or a completely new version after the policy issues have been further considered.
Can you just share with me what the department's attitude was to the NBN Co's revenue for the last financial year and its current forecast?
Senator, in the corporate plan, the 2013-14 corporate plan, telecommunications revenue, I understand, estimate for this current financial year was estimated at $120 million. I understand that as of the 30th of September, their telecommunications revenue for the year was in the order of $9 million. So, I mean, that lower revenue just reflects the fact that rollout is going quite a bit slower than was forecast in the corporate plan. So
just so that I'm clear, so the revenue forecast for 2012-2013 was 120 million, or 2013-2014?
2013-14, and that
was $120 million.
Yes, for telecommunications revenue, so wholesale revenue essentially.
So
which corporate plan are we?
2013-2014.
No, it's the 13. If I may correct, thank you.
2013-2014.
It's the 13-14 financial year as forecast in the 12-13 corporate plan.
Now, is that the original one or the revised forecast from March?
The original, Senator.
So it's not the revised one.
That's right, Senator. The original corporate plan, the agreed corporate plan.
Yeah. Well, the revised one was also accepted by the government in March.
Sorry,
The
Senator.
revised forecasts and all of that was also accepted by the government. There's a whole range of reforecasting done in March.
Yes, Senator.
But that's not the one you're talking about, the updated one.
No, we're talking about the existing approved corporate plan, the 12-15 corporate plan. Yes.
Not the one that incorporates the actual changes that were made in March.
Well, there isn't a full corporate plan that incorporates those changes.
this is an important point, I think, Mr. Robinson. So there's an existing approved corporate plan. So what other corporate plans might there be, or are people referring to?
Well, there is no subsequent corporate plan
Because Mr
agreed.
Turnbull sacked the board before they adopted it.
Senator, there was drafts issued, but when the new government issued that statement of expectations letter, it indicated that the company should start preparation of the 14-17 corporate plan, which they are currently doing, with the strategic review being the major input to that.
So for there to be a corporate plan, it needs to be approved corporately by the board.
Except if you sack the board.
Well, you can't if you don't. If the board
Yeah, you
hasn't,
can stop it being
if
approved if you sack them.
if a board has not approved a document, it can't be called a corporate plan.
Well, you sacked the board.
Senator, a corporate plan would not be an approved corporate plan until it had been through the steps of being considered by the board and approved by shareholder ministers or endorsed by.
Right. Perhaps you could, on that point, for my information, Ms Mason, perhaps you could step me through what that process is.
Oh, in general terms, Senator, there would normally be the preparation of a corporate plan within the company by management. They would normally provide that to the board of an entity for consideration. The board would endorse the plan and submit it to shareholder minister or ministers for their approval and endorsement. So those would be the general steps. Sometimes there can be iterations along the way.
Okay. So that process, what was the most recent corporate plan that that went through that entire process?
I believe it's the one referred to by Mr Robinson.
Which is the
2012 to 2015 plan.
right,
So
2012 to 2015. Right. Just want to talk about the rollout forecasts in the corporate plan by the different types of technology, if we could.
Can I just clarify, are we talking about 2010, 2012, 2013 or the revised March figures? And these ones were accepted by the government. So can you just clarify which figures you're talking about, Senator Smith, just to save confusion from the committee?
The 2013-2014 plan ones.
Which weren't the most recent approved by the government.
I'm asking the questions, Senator
just
Conroy, so
seeking
this
to
is
clarify.
this is furnishing my requirements. So I'm keen to understand.
Well, Senator, there was forecasts made in the 12-15 corporate plan, and as at 1st of December, by technology types, the actuals for this year up until 1st of December, there was 255,000 premises passed under the brownfields rollout, 71,000 premises passed under greenfields. Fixed wireless was 53,247 premises passed.
So this was 1st of December?
Yes, Senator.
And it was 255?
Brownfields premises passed.
255,000, and Greenfields was?
71,544.
Sorry, thanks for clarifying that.
And I might just say premises activated on the satellite were 43,087.
I'm just curious to understand what difficulties people might be experiencing in regards to access issues around households in apartment buildings or small businesses in shopping centres, and what's the reason for that?
Well, that's Senator's really the so-called service class 0 issue, and on the weekly rollout information that's provided by the company, there's numbers for the service class 0. So in the brownfields area at 1st of December, of the 255,253 premises passed for brownfields, 177,225 of those were able to receive a service, the difference being the so-called service class 0, which are typically apartment blocks, sometimes shopping centres, etc., which are more complicated connections. And
Service class 0 was stated by Mr Adcock, do receive a service. And in fact, he said 6,000 former service class 0s have now got a service.
You said that they will receive service.
No, he said
which is
6,000
correct.
have got a
Yeah.
service. He
Yes.
updated and gave us a figure for
Yeah.
how many now had an active service. So 6,000 that were in service class 0 actually now have a service.
These numbers are current as of 1 December.
Yeah, just
yeah.
going on what Mr Adcock said earlier, he could have had a few extra units hooked up.
So you could just, Mr Robinson, could you just share those figures with me again? So what was planned and what is...
well, the original corporate plan,
Yes.
for the 12-15 corporate plan, indicated that the brownfields rollout at the end of this financial year, the estimate was 1.129 million premises. Senator Conroy is correct that there was a revision to estimates made in
March, April, I think it was. March, April.
March. But the current rollout progress is below both estimates.
Right. And could you just provide some explanation about why that is the case?
They're the issues that will be really dealt with heavily in the strategic review, and there are a range of factors, including issues with contractors. I'd probably really suggest that that's a question for Tuesday, and the detail of because I expect there'd be a lot of detail in the strategic review.
Well, perhaps I could approach it a slightly different way. What needs to be done to make more premises serviceable in the department's view?
I think the company's working hard on the MDU issue, and
It's a
that's
policy question, I would have thought.
and that's to get and to offer business type services to shopping centres similar, and they're working hard to get approvals through body corporates, and they've got separate contracts in place to specifically target the MDU problems.
I just want to understand the department's point of view in regards to the rollout in my home state of WA, but also by extension South Australia and Northern Territory. Can you provide some commentary on the rollout in Western Australia, South Australia and the Northern Territory?
Well, on the same weekly information, Senator, the premises passed in Western Australia is 10,567. 4,157 of those are serviceable. That is, again, the difference is service class 0. And as of 1 December, there's 397 activated premises, and that's brownfields. There's 9,800 approximately premises greenfields passed, and 2,500 of those are activated.
And so that's Western Australia, and what's the comparison in the Northern Territory and South Australia?
The Northern Territory is 4,473 premises passed, 304 of those are serviceable. 6 of those, this is brownfields, sorry, 6 of those premises have got an activated service. In new developments, there's 848 premises passed, and 271 of those are activated.
And South Australia?
South Australia, it's 3,857 premises passed, 3,527 of those are serviceable, 1,147 premises have got an active service. In brownfields, in greenfields, it's 2,409 premises passed, and 511 of those have got an activated service.
So, Mr Robinson, can I just again clarify, because there still seems to be some confusion. Even the Minister on his own website says, note, past includes service class 0 premises which cannot obtain service. So, are these premises that will never be connected?
Well, the intention is they will be connected, Senator.
And
So
I think earlier was indicated 6,000 have now been connected. 6,000 MDU premises. That was Mr. Adcock's testimony. So it's a longer time, but the issue is not never going to be connected.
yeah, it's not never, Senator.
Thank you.
But does the department think that, of 10,500 premises passed in Western Australia, 397 having been activated as a reasonable outcome, good outcome, bad
That's an
outcome?
opinion, I would have thought, but I'm happy to ask him about the 18%.
Sorry, Senator
60%.
Conroy, perhaps you would like to go on that side of the table.
No, I'm
Perhaps
happy
you would
to.
like to, well, perhaps let me do my job on this
You're
side of the
asking
table.
opinion.
Sorry?
You're asking an opinion of an officer.
I think if I was one of the non-397 people in Western Australia, I'd be very, very curious to understand what the department's opinion or attitude is. So I'm just keen to understand in the department's view, is that good outcome, bad outcome, acceptable outcome? Was that what you thought might be the outcome?
I think I'd say, Senator, that the rollout across all states is behind the initial schedule, and that's why the strategic review is happening. And as Dr. Switkowski and others have said, the objective is to try and improve rollout performance.
So then were the original assumptions incorrect?
I think there'll be a lot more information about that in the strategic review.
Right. Were they inflated?
There'll be a lot more information about that in the strategic review.
Right. If we look at South Australia then, I think the figure was 3,000 premises passed? 3,800 premises passed?
Yes.
And 1,047 connected.
1,147.
1,147.
Our active services, yes.
Okay, so Tuesday is going to prove to be a very interesting day. Yes, of course.
The difference between the 3,000 and this 1,147, what are the various reasons for that? Just people not taking it up? I mean, I know Senator Conroy doesn't like me using service class 0. What combination of various factors would...
Well, I asked the marketing person from NBN that a little earlier.
Sorry. Well, maybe you could indulge me.
I think it varies depending on which the particular areas are, Senator. In the case of South Australia...
Yes, I'm interested in South Australia.
In fact, the service class 0 is a lot lower than some of the other states. I'm perhaps speculating slightly. It might be that some of those areas have got less MDUs in them, that is, have got less apartment blocks than other areas. And as to activation, the activation rates vary a bit between areas across the country, and it depends on how early it is since they've been connected to the NBN service. So in some areas they've been connected for some time and activation rates are higher. In other areas they might be lower for the fact that they haven't been connected for all that long. That is the local area hasn't been connected to the NBN network.
RSP marketing.
Yeah. And RSP marketing varies depending, again, on the areas.
Okay. Thanks, Senator.
Mr. Robbins, I understand that there's a term called adequately served. What does that mean and why is it relevant?
Adequately served, Senator, was a process initiated a year or so ago, or perhaps more, to assess, to essentially give alternative network providers, that is not NBN Co, an opportunity to meet the adequately served threshold, in which case NBN Co would not overbuild their areas. It was initiated under the previous government, of course, and the department managed the process rather than NBN Co. And the process isn't entirely completed, but it also only relates to networks in existence prior to 1 January 2012, but there has been a decision in relation to 29 networks that they have met the adequately served threshold, and that means, amongst other things, they'll be the provider of last resort. They commit to be connecting anyone who seeks a service in their geographic area, which is really the provider of last resort threshold. They'll offer a service to a wholesale service, and in fact wholesale only. So there's 29 networks. A lot of them are or small residential estates, or sometimes retirement villages. I could go through the complete list if that helps, but
You could table it for us, that would be more helpful.
Are they geographically spread?
There's two main providers, I might say. One's Opticom and one's Pivot, and there's estates in New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, Western Australia, South Australia.
Right. So what is the adequately served threshold?
Just a moment.
And how does it differ, or what's the magnitude of difference between the served threshold?
It's not so much a comparison to served, but
It's tempting. I know.
I just didn't think about
I mean, it must be.
three.
September the 8th must have been the start of a very, very difficult time for you. But I'm asking the questions. You're welcome. I'd invite you to go and sit on that side of the table if you like. But this really is my opportunity, because you've had a very, very generous cut of the time.
Yeah, no, and
Senator.
if I could
But I'm happy for
make the
Mr.
point,
Robinson
if I
to make
can-
an explanation, and
if I
if
could
it's
just
not
make
to
the
your
point.
liking, then
If I could just make the point that this is a committee about the NBN rollout, and you're asking questions about the regulatory effects on the department that have got no bearing on the terms of reference. So I think I've been very generous in letting you wander around outside the terms of reference.
Great.
But
And
without saying that, we've
Thank
only
you
got
for-
about 10
thank you
minutes
for your
to go.
generosity.
So
Thank you for your generosity. I'm going to just take a little bit more of it and ask Mr. Robinson to respond to my question about thresholds.
well, the criteria, and I'll try and be quick, it only relates to residential areas, I might say, not business areas. A network needs to be in existence as of January 2012, and that has to have characteristics like being capable of delivering certain speeds over the network. It needs to be able to keep up with technology developments over time. It needs to support a standard telephone service to the equivalent of NBN. It must provide a layer 2 wholesale service, and that has to be an open access arrangement. And it needs to provide prices equivalent to the NBN prices and meet the infrastructure of last resort criteria. That is, the network provider needs to commit to connecting everyone in the area.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up in a moment.
Of course. Just in regards to those adequately served areas, was there any consideration given to how they might be prioritised, or?
No, Senator, it was really a process. It was an open process in that providers had an opportunity to make their case that they met the threshold and they were willing to accept conditions that met those requirements. And so I think it was advertised or similar.
Okay.
And as I said, the process isn't entirely finished, but it has been settled in relation to those 29 areas.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Given the short time remaining, I just wanted to ask Ms Mason, we were watching, I'm hoping you answer this, but we were watching the earlier testimony from NBN today.
I'm afraid I wasn't, Senator. I have had...
Congratulations, that's 2 brownie points for you today.
I wish I had been, Senator. Sorry.
No. There was some quite startling information was revealed by the NBN officers that the CFO has no longer got responsibility for producing the corporate plan, and that Mr Rousselot, the yachting mate of Mr Turnbull, is now in charge of it.
Kaiser-like
and
relationship.
that, so I found that quite startling. The CFO is no longer the man in charge of doing the plan. And it was also revealed that he wasn't actually in the key 25 people preparing the review documents headed up by Mr. Russolo.
I'm not sure that's
No, I hadn't
correct,
finished.
Senator.
No, it was agreed that he's no longer in charge of the corporate plan, and I was
No,
about
I
to
agree
finish.
with that.
I was about to finish the sentence by saying that it was indicated that he was involved in reviews of it periodically along the way. Is that agreed?
I would have suggested that the 25 people to which they were referring to are the 25 people that were involved in the
Strategic review.
review.
Yeah.
However, that is not to suggest that he's not going to have a major input into the corporate plan. So I think they've probably drawn perhaps a longer bow than I did with.
The CFO signs off on most corporate plans in most places I've ever experienced. It's
Well,
at least-
not-
I don't think they said he wouldn't be signing off on it, Senator
No, he wouldn't.
Conroy.
He was
I
no
think,
longer.
I think they talked
he no
about the
longer had direct
CFO and others being
responsibility
under the
for it. I'm happy for
executive
them to
team.
play with words.
Right.
I think
Happy
you're
for
the one
us to
playing
debate
with
the
words.
technical term. But what was made clear to the committee this morning that the CFO is no longer in charge of preparation of the corporate plan. I was just wondering if you were aware of that.
No, Senator, I wasn't.
Mr. Clark, were you aware of that?
No, in a specific... Well, I knew that Mr Ruslow was working on the transformation work and leading the team in terms of the strategic review, but the strategic review is an input to the corporate plan.
No, but Mr. Brown revealed that Mr. Ruslow is now in charge of the corporate plan as well as the input into the corporate
Okay, then I didn't hear that specific evidence and...
Okay. No, so I just wanted to make sure that both officers at the table were aware of it. Now, I did want to ask a couple of questions about broadband quality.
Certainly.
So I didn't want the officers to feel wasted. Apologies, we haven't got to them yet. So if I could grab the officers, because as you know, I am very interested in Williamstown and Melbourne and what you know about the streets of my suburbs. So come on down.
In your 5 minutes and 15 seconds.
How are you, Ms Granger?
Well, thanks, Senator.
So I just was wondering if you could give us an outline of the sort of information that you've collected to assist with identifying the type of broadband availability across Australia.
Yes, Senator. Jo Granger, Department of Communications.
You might need to speak up a little closer to the...
Oh, sorry. Jo Granger, Department of Communications. Senator, as you're aware, broadband availability and quality is affected by a range of factors, and we have collected a range of data to analyse that. So in terms of the data we have available to the department for consideration, we've got spatial representation of all the major broadband technology networks, so fibre to the premises, HFC, fibre to the node, obviously NBN Co's wireless networks, it's fixed network and information about satellite networks. We have obviously also the spatial information on the mobile broadband networks. In terms of a range of other information available to the department, we are looking at spatial information. So we have the geocoded national address file, which is the location of all premises. We have the exchange info data set, and this gives us the exchange serving area and distribution area boundaries. These are building blocks, if you like, of network information. We have a copy of record keeping rule information in relation to infrastructure. This goes to the services in operation, the geospatial location of things like cabinets in the network. We have information from the Telstra wholesale website. There's a range of reports there. They go to things like the DSL port availability in different exchanges and the customer access network or the copper access network. DSL enablement status in each exchange. The number of premises affected by pair gains.
That sounds fantastic.
At the exchange
Tell me about
centre.
Williamstown in Melbourne, because you seem to have every piece of information. What speed is my house getting and anyone in my street? Or anyone in the suburb of Williamstown?
Well, Senator, the report, the analysis of Ms Granger, the data that Ms Granger
that was
has
just about as
outlined...
comprehensive as it could be.
The data that Ms Granger has outlined is still being analysed, and the report has... You recall at the last
so are
meeting...
you telling me that this information will allow you to opine on the broadband speeds received by people living in Williamstown and Melbourne?
I'm getting there, Senator. I'm going to answer that question.
Good. That's what I've sounded like an incredibly impressive array of information. So help me. How does that tell you what speed anyone in my suburb of Williamstown is getting?
So Ms Granger's team has assembled those quite extensive data sets with cooperation of the telco industry, and her team is currently undertaking the analysis of that data. We've not yet settled our advice to the government as to how to best to characterise quality and availability, because as per the earlier estimates, it has many dimensions. This is the foundation data.
I'm just asking one simple question. What's the speed of one single broadband connection in Williamstown?
But the point that I want to get to that goes to your question is this is not a house-by-house engineering analysis. This will not answer the specific question on a specific address. The intent of it is to indicate areas, not individual households, but areas of inadequately or not served or underserved, whatever language you choose to use it, in order to inform prioritisation of the rollout, completion of the rollout of the NBN.
I'm confused.
And therefore,
I think Williamstown's got terrible broadband. I live it. I think it's got terrible broadband. How are you going to recommend Williamstown against Footscray or Crace or any other suburb based on this information?
So with that data, Ms Granger's team is attempting to normalise that information so that comparative analyses of areas can be made, and it will be possible to characterise this area.
Without testing a single line, without actually knowing what a single connection speed is in a single home, you're going to try and do a comparison of what broadband speeds people are actually getting or theoretically getting.
We're using the information that Ms Granger has outlined to characterise broadband availability and quality area by area.
But you won't have actually tested a single speed of a single house anywhere in Australia.
It is not an engineering analysis.
It's not an engineering question. That's just what are consumers currently getting. I mean, you're being asked by the Minister, and there's no reflection on the department. That is an impressive array of information and clearly an impressive amount of work that's been done. But none of it actually goes to a single speed of a single Australian and allows you to match a single Australian's broadband speed against another single Australian's broadband speed to make a comparative analysis.
Well, first of all, the data includes information about what speeds are actually being achieved at particular locations within the area. What we're not able to do is to represent the 10 million odd premises and draw a ranking of what they can do. But we are characterising the availability of speeds, quality, availability, area by area, and it does include actual data points in that, as well as proxies and characterisations.
Okay, thanks. I've just got a couple of final questions as we're finishing. The financial statements of NBN Co included in the 2013 annual report were audited by the ANAO. Is that correct, Ms Mason? This is the annual report, which got tabled a little while ago.
Yes.
The audit includes the notes to the financial statements, is that correct?
The ANAO, these questions are probably best directed to them, but in general terms, yes. So the ANAO would review the financial statements, including any notes to those financial statements.
So in the audit report, they wrote, an audit also includes evaluating the appropriateness of the accounting policies used and the reasonableness of accounting estimates made by the directors, as well as evaluating the overall presentation of the financial report. And that includes the appropriateness of the policies included in the notes. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
And the auditor concluded that the financial report of NBN Co Limited is in accordance with the Corporations Act, including giving a true and fair view of the consolidated entity's financial position and complying with Australian accounting standards. Is that correct?
Senator, I don't have a copy of the annual report, but it's likely that the statements that you're reading out are standard statements, and it's likely that the ANO would have made such findings.
Yeah. I draw your attention to note 1LI. Apologies if I've got the numbers wrong there. To the accounts, which outlines NBN Co's approach to impairment. In that note, they say that for the purpose of determining impairment, NBN Co has determined that the ubiquitous broadband network is a single cash generating unit. Is that correct? Does that sound right? Familiar?
It sounds probable without having the annual report in front of me and without
Okay.
checking.
Sure. And the auditor has concluded this is an appropriate accounting policy. That would be, by definition.
Sounds reasonable.
Okay, thank you, and thank you to all the senators. And thank you, and no doubt we'll be seeing some of you again soon.
Thank you, Chair.
Close the meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, sorry, just before we close, if I could just send a few thank yous to some old friends, Arkvark, Tailgater, UTC, Megalfar and JW BAM, and some new friends in Glenhope, Fold King 86, Swift One only by fibre, David 935, Watda. Thanks for your ongoing interest and support. Thank you, we'll close the meeting.